by bit, I will show images of neuromyelitis optica, or NMO, and talk about the aquaporine 4 water channels, because in about 70% of patients with NMO, there are antibodies directed against these aquaporine 4 channels. And these are transmembrane proteins that are drawn like this and imagined by me like a water park toy that transport water through the cells. In neuromyelitis optica, there's involvement of the spinal cord, and the involvement of the spinal cord is for a longer segment than in multiple sclerosis. And there's also involvement of the optic nerve, and the optic nerve is not a peripheral nerve, but it is white matter of the brain. On this post-contrast T1 weighted image, you can see involvement of the posterior optic nerve, bilateral in a patient with NMO, whereas in multiple sclerosis, the involvement is more often unilateral and involving the anterior segment. In NMO, there's also involvement of the white matter of the supratentorial brain, especially periventricular, and in the diencephalic region with hyperintensity in both of the thalami. This is another sagittal post-contrast T1 weighted image of the patient we started with the bilateral optic nerve involvement, and you can see there's also enhancement of and involvement of the periaqueductal gray and of the area postrema, which is the vomiting center in the medulla. And if you've seen the Brain Bit by Bit website and read the section about lymphatics, you have already read that in the brain, the capillaries are not only surrounded by a layer of endothelial cells like in the rest of the body, but that there is an extra layer of astrocyte end feet that is continuous with the pia mater. And in the astrocyte end feet, there are a lot of aquaporine 4 channels. And the fluid from the capillaries passes the gaps between the endothelial cells, and it can also pass the gaps between the astrocyte end feet, and it can be transported transcellularly in the aquaporine 4 channels to the interstitium of the brain. And while it is drawn like a very neatly arranged unit, in real life it is much more flowing like a river, because this is an electron microscopic image with a scale of 10 micrometers, where you can see the capillary, the astrocyte end feet in green, and the paracellular space going here. And there are certain regions in the brain that do not have a very tight blood-brain barrier, and they are located around the ventricles and therefore called the circumventricular organs. And these regions are in direct contact with the blood, because that is important for these brain regions to have information directly from the body and the blood, and not with a blood-brain barrier in between. For example, in the vomiting center, if there is something toxic in the blood, it is important that if it has been ingested by the gastrointestinal tract, that you vomit immediately and you do not want a delay. So in all these regions, the endothelium of the capillaries has larger gaps, and the astrocytes have more aquaporine 4 channels, which enables the transport of the fluid to the interstitium of the brain. And these regions are involved in NMO if there's antibodies against aquaporine 4. So it's the entire ependymal surface of the ventricles and the diencephalic regions surrounding the third ventricle, the regions in the brainstem periaqueductal, and the ependymal surface of the fourth ventricle, so mainly the back of it. And this is a drawing where you can see the aquaporine 4 antibodies in the capillary going through the endothelium into the brain and disrupting the astrocyte end feed and leading to the inflammation. And there's a small percentage of patients with NMO, 30%, that are aquaporine 4 negative, and some of them are positive for antibodies against myelin oligodendrocyte glycoprotein that you can see here, and that is targeted against the oligodendrocyte. So you get a different type of inflammation. And in the anti-MOG variant, there's more anterior optic nerve involvement, and if it's supratentorial, it gives an image like acute disseminated encephalomyelitis. So it might not come as a surprise to you that the next brain bit by bit vlog will be about ADEM. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll watch the next one as